Polestar hit the road with a bang a few years ago, didn't they? With the super coupe concept car like Polestar 1 and then the all-electric Polestar 2, which in the UK has been doing a very good job of stealing sales away from a certain Californian EV maker. But the last few years have been a little quiet for Polestar, and it's not necessarily all of its own doing, but it's about to get really busy for the Swedish EV maker.
Before we crack on with the 4, you might be wondering about the Polestar 3. And yes, the large 5-seater SUV is still on its way. In fact, we've driven a prototype and it's certainly shaping up to be quite a thing. But for now, let's get back to what Polestar is expecting to be its most popular model.
So much like the Polestar 2, the Polestar 4 doesn't really sit in a specific market segment. Now in pictures it can be quite difficult to get a sense of how big this thing is, but in the flesh it's got a sort of SUV, saloon, coupe vibe going on, and it's kind of all three, but neither of them all at once. What you need to know though is that this, at 4.8 metres long and starting at just under £60,000 here in the UK, it rivals anything on the saloon side, from a Mercedes-Benz EQE or a BMW i5 to a Kia EV6 or a Mustang Mach-E on the crossover side.
Like a lot of those rivals, the Polestar 4's silhouette is just a bit too sleek and streamlined to really be considered a traditional SUV. And that's before we get onto the car's more contentious elements.
Polestar 4 has been making some pretty consistent headlines based on the fact that it doesn't have a rear window, and a lot of people don't seem to like it. Now, I understand why, but there's some very good reasons why Polestar hasn't. To start with, it's changed the entire way that they've designed the back of the car. Usually a sloping roofline like this has compromises in terms of headroom, but what they've been able to do is push back the rear header rail to unlock some rear seat space. But you might be thinking, how do you see out of the back of it? Well, that's where this little rear view camera comes in, because what it does is it feeds an image to a screen that's mounted where the rear view mirror used to be. Now this might feel like really far-fetched technology, but it's actually quite common in the car industry. Everyone from Range Rover, Land Rover, Ferrari, and even a few Fords have this sort of thing. I mean, have you tried to look out the back of a fastback saloon car these days? Those windscreens are really, really narrow, which means that the view out isn't particularly good anyway, especially on a car this sort of shape.
Alright, well, with that out of the way, we can finally focus on the rest of the 4, which, to be honest, is a fairly strange melange of bits from all over the world. You see, the Polestar 2 and 3 both share a basic technical toolkit with various Volvos, and the Polestar 5, that comes after this, will be based on a totally bespoke chassis. But this 4 finds its heart in a Chinese Geely toolkit that's also being used by Smart, remember them, and Chinese startup Zeekr, amongst various others.
But before you get all snobby, it is worth remembering that Chinese architectures are very, very competitive, and it shows in the Polestar 4's numbers. All Polestar 4 models in the UK will come with a 100 kilowatt-hour battery pack and either 1 or 2 motors. This one here is the top spec dual motor and has 538 brake horsepower and is capable of up to 360 miles on a charge. It'll also charge at 200 kilowatts, which means that its numbers are right up there with the German brands and actually ahead of all of its American, Japanese and Korean counterparts.
The entry-level model will keep its 100 kilowatt-hour battery, but drops the front motor and therefore reduces power to 268 brake horsepower. Range, however, does go up to 379 miles, and regardless of the motor layout, both offer the same charging capability. They'll also come with something called vehicle to load, and that allows you to draw power from the battery if you need, essentially turning it into a massive mobile battery pack. This might sound like a bit of a niche right now, especially if you're not really into boiling kettles at the roadside, but it does in future open the car up to certain functions associated with large battery storage, such as home energy generation.
Polestar's also keen to tell us how hard they've been working on the ride and handling, with specific attention paid to the ride quality, which can be a bit of a bugbear in the existing Polestar 2.
But Polestar seems to be most excited about some of the elements that I think its customers will be more interested in, and that's style and interior presentation.
This is evident here because it is so typically Polestar, and in a really good way as well. Unlike Volvo, which kind of does the more soft and cuddly vibe, this is much more sleek and techy. Think more Galactic Empire rather than Scandinavian furniture store. It goes without saying these days that the interior is typically dominated by its digital interfaces. Now this is the first time that in a Polestar the screen has been mounted horizontally rather than vertically, and it controls all of the car's key functions. Now a lot of people won't like the fact that it doesn't have any main switchgear, but it doesn't matter though, because the UI is the same stuff that you'll find in the upcoming Polestar 3. The whole operating system is underpinned by Google, which means that Maps, your media and a personal assistant is built right into the system. In front of the driver is a dedicated 10.2-inch display that shows all of the standard driver functions like speed, trip info and your battery. Crucially, it's all very clear and quick and easy to read, but if you don't like that, there's also a fairly chunky heads-up display above it as well. The rest of the cabin is super sleek and beautifully built. Now, A lot of manufacturers harp on about a really minimalist style interior, but it requires very high quality materials to pull it off. This is a bit of a problem that lots of manufacturers are dealing with, but the materials in here are so plush that it is absolutely not a problem.
It's also worth mentioning the sheer amount of space in the second row, as that shuffle header rail does indeed unlock a vast amount of headroom. Legroom is also very impressive, and being such a wide car, you'll also fit 3 adults abreast, no problem. You can also remove that little panel on top of the rear seats and fold them down to create a big open load space. And in terms of its exterior design, the Polestar 4 has already gained some notoriety in the world of car design. And while it is slick, there are a wealth of little tricks around the car that help make it look less big and tall than it actually is.
Starting with these black sections along the sills. Now, this is a trick that lots of designers use to make SUVs feel a little less bulky and heavy. Now, what Polestar's designers have done is brought the section right up to this line in the door to make it look even more sleek than it actually is, but it leaves quite a lot of black section on the bottom. Now, you can specify this in body colour, but I have an inkling that the car's designers, including the head of design, Max, is going to have a specific opinion about which he prefers. The face, though, is pure Polestar. It's got these new two-piece headlights that separate that original Thor's hammer headlight motif, and overall, it, as well as all of the other detailing, sits on a really clean and typically Polestar-style body.
Polestar is also being very good about the sustainability of its cars too, using where possible sustainable materials that are also recyclable. Polestar, along with Volvo, are also the only 2 manufacturers that publish some form of life cycle assessment for its cars, both until the point of sale and over its usage period.
This essentially puts on paper how much carbon is emitted during the manufacturing and usage phase of the vehicle. Now, of course, the usage phase will change depending on where you charge it and where the electricity is sourced from. But in any case, this is a really important piece of new information that manufacturers like Polestar is being quite good at giving us. Now, it's all very complicated paperwork, but essentially what it's trying to do is compare the amount of carbon output this car produces compared to something else. Now, this isn't law at the moment, but it will be. And it's really good to see that Polestar is already showing some form of transparency when it comes to how green their cars actually are. So exactly how green is the new Polestar 4? Well, at the point that it's leaving the factory, 19.9 tonnes of CO2e has been produced in its whole manufacturing and the suppliers. Now, for context, it's a bit of a difficult number, but it's 20% less than the Polestar 2, which, remember, is smaller and has a smaller battery pack.
As mentioned before, pricing will start at just under £60,000 for the long-range single-motor variant, with the dual-motor car coming in at £67,000. If you wish, there's a further £4,000 performance pack available for the dual-motor car only, which throws in bigger brakes, retuned suspension, and some gold styling details, amongst other things.
All that's left to do is to drive it, to figure out whether Polestar has nailed its 4th car. Time will tell, but I have a feeling it's going to be a good one.